I wasn't supposed to be there. The Velvet Crown Casino smelled like expensive cigars and desperation. Two things I knew nothing about. My best friend Mia had dragged me along because her date canceled, and she refused to waste a $300 dress. So there I was, a librarian from the South Side in borrowed Louboutins that pinched my toes, pretending I belonged among women dripping in diamonds. That's when I saw him. He stood at the high-stakes poker table like he owned every chip, every dealer, every breath in the room. Dark hair pushed back, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes, God, those eyes, black as the Chicago River at midnight. When he looked at me, I felt it in my spine. Not attraction, recognition. Like he'd been waiting. I should have walked away. Instead, I walked toward him. "You're shaking," he said, not a question. His voice was velvet wrapped around a threat. "I'm cold." "No," he smiled. Slow, dangerous, certain. "You're terrified. And you should be." I didn't know then that Dante Moretti ran the most powerful crime family in Illinois. I didn't know that sitting at his table would cost me everything I thought I wanted. I only knew that when he leaned close and whispered, "You're playing with my luck now, princess." Something inside me ignited. And I've been burning ever since. You will feel so many emotions in this mysterious love story I'm about to tell. Please support us by clicking subscribe to the channel. I've spent my whole life learning to disappear. It's a skill you develop when you're the girl whose mother drank breakfast from a bottle. The girl whose father left on a Tuesday and never came back. You learn to press yourself against walls, to make your footsteps silent, to become so small that the world forgets you exist. By the time I was 12, I could walk through a crowded room and leave no memory behind. But that night at the Velvet Crown Casino, I forgot everything I knew. Mia had wandered off to find champagne, leaving me adrift in a sea of sequins and smoke. The noise was overwhelming, chips clicking, laughter erupting, the constant electronic hum of slot machines crying for attention. I needed air. I needed quiet. I needed to find somewhere to hide until Mia was ready to leave. That's when I saw the table. It was tucked into an alcove, separated from the main floor by velvet ropes and two men in black suits who looked like they'd been carved from granite. The table itself was different from the others. Mahogany instead of felt, crystal glasses instead of plastic cups, and only 4 players instead of a dozen. Everything about it whispered private. Everything about it screamed, "Stay away." So naturally, I walked right toward it. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the borrowed heels making me someone I wasn't. Maybe it was the 2 glasses of wine I'd had on an empty stomach. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night, maybe some part of me already knew. Some part of me recognized him before I even saw his face. The granite men let me pass. I didn't understand why until later. I sank into the empty chair like it had been waiting for me, and that's when I felt it. The weight of his gaze. Not glancing, not curious. Studying. I looked up, and the world tilted sideways. Dante Moretti didn't look like a monster. He looked like a fallen angel who'd made peace with his descent. Dark hair pushed back from a face that could have been sculpted by an artist who understood that true beauty requires sharp edges. A jaw that could cut glass, cheekbones that caught the light like weapons. And his eyes, God, his eyes. They were the color of midnight, of secrets, of every bad decision I'd ever made wrapped into one devastating stare. He was watching me like I was the equation he intended to solve. "You're at the wrong table." His voice was velvet over gravel, smooth and rough at once. I should have apologized. I should have stumbled away with burning cheeks and blamed the wine. That's what the old Clara would have done. The invisible Clara, the girl who pressed herself against walls, but she wasn't there that night. Maybe the other tables were at the wrong casino. The words came out before I could stop them. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Maybe? Or the beginning of interest. The other players shifted uncomfortably, and I realized too late that I'd just talked back to someone important. Someone dangerous. Interesting? One word. He said one word, and it felt like a verdict. The game continued. I didn't understand the rules, but I watched anyway, hypnotized by the rhythm of his hands as he manipulated the cards. Those hands, large, elegant, capable, hands that could create or destroy with equal ease. I wondered what they'd feel like against my skin, and the thought shocked me so deeply that I gasped. He heard it. Of course he heard it. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely, and heat flooded my face. That's when the man beside me decided I was his lucky charm. He was older, drunk, sweating through his expensive shirt. He grabbed my wrist with fingers that felt like sausages, yanking me toward him with a laugh that smelled like whiskey and desperation. "Come on, sweetheart. Blow on my chips. Bring me some luck." I tried to pull away. His grip tightened. Panic fluttered in my chest. Familiar, old, the feeling of being small and trapped and completely powerless. Then the room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like someone had pressed mute on the entire universe. "Remove your hand." Dante hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice. But something in the air had changed. Something primal and terrifying. The drunk man's face went pale, then gray, then a shade of white I'd never seen on living skin. He released me so fast I nearly fell. I didn't know she was... "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti. I didn't realize..." "Leave." One word again. The man scrambled away, knocking over chips and glasses in his haste. The granite men appeared from nowhere and escorted him out. Within 30 seconds, it was like he'd never existed. Dante's eyes found mine. "Are you hurt?" I looked down at my wrist. Red marks bloomed where the man had grabbed me, already darkening toward purple. I'd had worse. I'd had so much worse. "I'm fine." That wasn't what I asked. His voice was different now. Still commanding. Still powerful. But underneath it, something else. Something that almost sounded like concern. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with any of this. "Clara!" Mia's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She appeared at the edge of the alcove, champagne sloshing, eyes wide as she took in the scene. Me at the private table, the scattered chips, the granite men, and most of all, the dark-eyed man who hadn't looked away from me once. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. She's with me. She didn't mean to." "Clara, come on." She grabbed my arm, the same one that was already bruising, and I winced. Dante saw it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I let Mia pull me to my feet. I let her drag me toward the elevator. But at the last second, something made me turn back. He was still watching. Not the cards. Not the other players. Not the chaos I'd left behind. Just me. He stood slowly, deliberately, and buttoned his jacket with the precision of a man who never made accidental movements. Then he spoke, and his voice carried across the distance like it was meant only for my ears. "From now on, no one touches you." The elevator doors closed before I could respond. Mia was talking, asking questions, demanding explanations, her words tumbling over each other in a waterfall of confusion. But I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything except the echo of those 7 words, branding themselves into my memory. "From now on, no one touches you." I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand that in one evening, I'd gone from invisible to claimed. From nobody to something far more dangerous, a fascination. But as the elevator descended and the casino's glitter faded behind us, I pressed my hand against the window and watched my reflection stare back at me. The girl I saw looked the same. Red hair, green eyes, borrowed dress, borrowed shoes. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Something had cracked open. And deep in my chest, in the place where I'd buried every feeling I couldn't afford to have, a single ember began to glow. He'd seen me. For the first time in my life, someone had actually seen me. I should have been terrified. I was. But underneath the fear, burning quietly alongside it, was something else entirely. Something that felt like the first breath after years of drowning. Something that felt like the beginning of everything. 3 days passed before I started to believe it had been a dream. The casino, the velvet ropes, the dark-eyed man who spoke like his words were law. All of it began to fade into the haze of wine and borrowed glamour. I went back to my life. My real life. The one with water stains on the ceiling and a radiator that coughed more than it heated. The one where I shelved books for 8 hours a day and came home to microwave dinners and silence. Normal. Safe. Invisible. Until the black car appeared. I noticed it on Thursday morning, parked across from the library where I worked. Sleek. Expensive. Windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors. It was still there when I left for lunch. Still there when I came back. Still there when I locked up at 6 and walked to the train station with my coat pulled tight against the November wind. I told myself it was coincidence. Chicago was full of black cars. Then the roses came. 24 of them, blood red and impossibly perfect, delivered to my desk the next morning. No card, no note, just the flowers and the weight of a gaze I couldn't see but somehow felt against my skin. "Someone's got an admirer," my coworker Janine said, waggling her eyebrows. "Let me guess. Tall, dark, and handsome." I forced a laugh that tasted like ash. That night, I came home to find an envelope from my landlord. I braced myself for the eviction notice I'd been expecting for months. I was 3 payments behind, living on borrowed time and growing anxiety. But the letter inside wasn't a threat. It was a receipt, paid in full, 12 months in advance. My hands were shaking so badly I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. And even then, I didn't believe them. I couldn't, because accepting what they meant would force me to accept something else entirely. That he'd found me. That he'd been watching. That the moment in the casino hadn't ended when the elevator doors closed. It was still happening. I spent the weekend jumping at shadows. Every footstep in the hallway made my heart seize. Every phone notification sent adrenaline flooding through my veins. Mia called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Monday morning, I confronted the car. I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe desperation, maybe exhaustion, maybe the ghost of my mother whispering that running never solved anything. I marched across the street in my practical flats and my second-hand coat and knocked on the tinted window with more force than I felt. It rolled down to reveal a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, weathered face, eyes that had seen things I couldn't imagine. Miss Ashford. He nodded like we were old acquaintances. "Mr. Moretti thought you might have questions?" "I don't have questions. I have boundaries. And your boss is crossing them. Mr. Moretti would like to explain in person. Then Mr. Moretti can make an appointment like a normal human being." Something flickered across the driver's face. Surprise, maybe? Or the beginning of respect. He reached into his jacket. I flinched, hating myself for it, and pulled out a business card. Heavy stock? Embossed letters, nothing but a phone number. "When you're ready." The window rolled up, the car pulled away, and I stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air, clutching a dead man's number like it was a lifeline. I didn't call. Of course I didn't call. I threw the card in a drawer and went back to my life, determined to forget that any of this had happened. But forgetting wasn't an option anymore. The photograph arrived Tuesday night. It was slipped under my door sometime between dinner and sleep. I found it when I got up to check the locks for the 3rd time. A single image, printed on glossy paper, showing me at the casino in my borrowed dress. My face was circled in red marker. Thick, deliberate strokes that looked like blood. Beneath it, someone had written 3 words. "You were chosen." I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred. Until my hands stopped shaking and went numb instead. Until the fear crystallized into something harder, something colder, something that felt almost like clarity. This wasn't about Dante Moretti. Or maybe it was, but not in the way I'd assumed. Someone else was watching. Someone who saw me as a message, a pawn, a way to hurt the man who'd claimed me without my permission. I was caught between 2 forces I didn't understand, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't handle this alone. The phone rang at midnight. I shouldn't have answered. Every horror movie, every crime documentary, every cautionary tale I'd ever consumed screamed at me to let it go to voicemail. But something in me was tired of hiding. Tired of being the girl who pressed herself against walls. "Hello? You received a message." His voice was unmistakable, even through the phone. That velvet over gravel tone that made my spine straighten involuntarily. "I need to see the photograph. How do you know about Clara?" Just my name. Just 2 syllables. But the way he said it stopped my breath. "I'm coming to you. Don't open the door for anyone else." He hung up before I could argue. 20 minutes later, a knock echoed through my apartment. I looked through the peephole and felt my heart stutter. Dante Moretti stood in my shabby hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his tailored coat and Italian shoes. Behind him, 2 of the granite men waited like shadows. I opened the door. He stepped inside without asking, his eyes sweeping the apartment in a single glance, taking in the water stains, the second-hand furniture, the life I'd built from scraps and stubbornness. I waited for judgment, for the curl of his lip that would tell me he found my world as small as I'd always feared. Instead, He looked at me. Show me. I handed him the photograph. He studied it for a long moment, his expression betraying nothing, and then carefully folded it and slipped it into his pocket. You need to come with me. I don't need to do anything. Clara. He stepped closer, and I caught his scent. Something dark and expensive that made my head swim. This photograph means someone has marked you. In my world, that's not a threat. It's a declaration of war. Your world, not mine. It became your world the moment you sat at my table. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. I wanted to argue. I wanted to throw him out and barricade the door and pretend that none of this was happening. But I could still feel the phantom grip of the drunk man's fingers on my wrist. I could still see the red circle around my face, thick as blood. If I come with you, I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. What happens to my life, my job, my freedom? You keep all of it, under my protection. Protection? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call this? Because it feels a lot like control. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor, so brief I almost missed it. I am offering you a choice, Clara. Stay here, alone, and face whoever sent that message, or come with me and let me keep you safe. Why? The question burst out before I could stop it. Why do you care what happens to me? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes searched my face, lingering on the shadows under my eyes, the tension in my shoulders, the way I held myself like I was bracing for impact. Because when you looked at me in that casino, he said finally, you weren't afraid. I was terrified. Yes, but you didn't look away. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. Outside, the city hummed its endless song. Inside, two strangers stood on the edge of something neither of them could name. 1 week, I whispered. I'll give you 1 week to figure out who sent that photograph. After that, I go back to my life. 1 week, he agreed. He extended his hand. I stared at it for a long moment. Those elegant fingers, that capable palm, and thought about all the reasons I should say no. Then I thought about the red circle around my face. I took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, oddly gentle for a man who commanded an empire of shadows. And when he pulled me toward the door, toward the waiting car, toward a world I didn't understand, I let him. Because the truth was, I'd been invisible my whole life, and being seen, even by a monster, felt like coming up for air. The penthouse didn't feel real. 62 floors above Lake Michigan, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a scattered jewelry box. I stood in the center of Dante Moretti's world and wondered how I'd ended up here. The apartment was enormous. Sleek marble floors, furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary, art on the walls that belonged in museums. Everything was beautiful. Everything was cold. A gilded cage is still a cage. The first 2 days, I barely saw him. He had meetings, phone calls, business that happened behind closed doors with men who looked at me like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. I was given a room of my own, larger than my entire apartment, with a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on clouds and a bathroom with heated floors and a shower that had more buttons than my car. I hated how much I loved it. The guards rotated in shifts. Always 2 at the door, another in the hallway, a 4th somewhere I couldn't see. They were polite, professional, and utterly immovable. When I asked to go for a walk, they offered to accompany me. When I asked to go alone, they simply stared until I retreated. By the 3rd day, the walls were closing in. I need to see Mia. Dante looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. We were in his study. Him behind a massive desk, me pacing like a trapped animal. That's not advisable. I don't care what's advisable. She's my best friend. She's probably worried sick. She thinks you're visiting family in Michigan. I stopped pacing. Excuse me. It was necessary to provide an explanation for your absence. The cover story is simple and verifiable. You had someone lie to my best friend. I had someone protect your best friend from becoming a target. The words hit me like cold water. I wanted to argue, to rage against the casual way he'd rearranged my life without permission. But underneath the anger, I could feel something else, the terrible logic of his reasoning. If Mia knew where I was, she might come looking. And if she came looking, I thought of the photograph, the red circle, the words scrawled beneath. You were chosen. Fine, I said, the word tasting like surrender. But I can't stay locked up in here forever. I'll go insane. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe. Or understanding. There's a restaurant on the 45th floor. The rooftop garden is private. And if you want to go somewhere specific, we can arrange security. Security, escorts, drivers. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Do you ever go anywhere alone? Not anymore. The simplicity of his answer stopped me. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw something beneath, a weariness that matched my own. He'd been living like this for years. Decades, maybe. Always watched, always guarded, always calculating 3 steps ahead. For the first time, I wondered what it had cost him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The penthouse was too quiet, too perfect, too saturated with the scent of money and power. I wandered through the darkened rooms, my bare feet silent on the marble floors, until I found myself at the window overlooking the lake. The water was black and endless, scattered with the reflected lights of the city. I was still standing there when I heard footsteps behind me. Trouble sleeping? His voice was different in the darkness, softer, stripped of its commanding edge. I turned to find him in the doorway, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and pants, his feet bare like mine. Without the armor of his suits, he looked almost human. I'm not used to the quiet, I admitted. In my apartment, there's always noise. Traffic, neighbors, the radiator complaining. I can have someone install a sound system. Ambient noise, white noise, whatever you prefer. That's not... I shook my head, frustrated by my inability to articulate what I meant. It's not about the sound. It's about feeling like I belong somewhere. Like I'm not just... floating. He moved closer, stopping beside me at the window. Our reflections stared back at us, 2 ghosts suspended above the city. I felt that way once, he said quietly. After my mother died. The house felt wrong, too big, too empty. I kept waiting for her to walk through the door. It was more than he'd shared before, more than I'd expected him to share ever. I held my breath, afraid that any movement would shatter the moment. How old were you? 14. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it, flat, careful, rehearsed, told me it wasn't a long time ago at all. Some wounds don't heal. They just learn to hide. My mother drank, I heard myself say. The words came out without permission, rising from that locked place inside me where I kept all the things I never talked about. Started when my dad left. Got worse every year. By the time I was 10, I was the one taking care of her. Making sure she ate, putting her to bed, lying to the neighbors about why she missed work. I waited for the judgment, the pity, the careful distance that always appeared when people learned the truth about my childhood. Instead, he simply said, "That must have been lonely." 3 words, nothing profound, nothing pitying, nothing that tried to fix what couldn't be fixed. Just acknowledgement, just the simple recognition that I had survived something difficult. My throat tightened. I used to dream about being rescued, I whispered. Some prince showing up to carry me away from all of it. Stupid, right? The kind of fantasy you're supposed to outgrow. Why stupid? Because princes don't exist, and rescue doesn't either. In the end, the only person who could save me was me. He turned to look at me then, his dark eyes catching the city lights. And yet here you are. Here I am, I agreed, trapped in a tower with a dragon. Is that what I am? A dragon? I don't know what you are. The admission hung in the air between us. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could smell that expensive cologne mixed with something underneath it, something human and real. I'm not going to hurt you, Clara. You can't promise that. No, he agreed. But I can promise that I will try very hard not to. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But standing there in the darkness with our reflections floating above the city, it felt like more honesty than I'd ever received from anyone. The next night, I slipped out. I know it was stupid. I know it was reckless. But Mia had texted me 17 times, increasingly frantic, and the guilt was eating me alive. I told myself I would just meet her for coffee, just 30 minutes. Just enough to prove I was alive, and then I'd come straight back. I made it 8 blocks before they found me. Not Dante's men, someone else. They cornered me in an alley behind a restaurant. 3 figures in dark clothes with faces hidden behind ski masks. My heart slammed against my ribs as I backed against the brick wall, searching desperately for an escape route. Relax. The leader's voice was casual, almost friendly. We're not going to hurt you. We just want to take some pictures. Pictures? For Mr. Moretti. To remind him what he has to lose. One of them pulled out a phone and started snapping photos. Me pressed against the wall. Me with terror written across my face. Me looking exactly like what they wanted. A victim. A weakness. A message. Tell Moretti we're coming for what's his. Then they were gone, melting into the shadows like they'd never existed. I stood in that alley for what felt like hours, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. By the time the black car screeched to a stop at the entrance, I could barely breathe. Dante emerged like a force of nature. His face was carved from ice, his eyes blazing with a fury that made the air around him crackle. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders, running down my arms, checking for damage I couldn't feel. Are you hurt? No, they didn't. I told you not to leave without telling me. I know. I'm sorry. His arms wrapped around me. The movement was so unexpected, so utterly at odds with everything I knew about him, that I froze. He held me against his chest, one hand cradling the back of my head, and I could feel his heart pounding beneath my cheek. We stayed like that for a long moment. 2 people in a dirty alley, surrounded by shadows. They took pictures. I whispered against his shirt. They said they wanted to show you what you have to lose. His arms tightened almost imperceptibly. Then they don't understand anything, he murmured. Because I already know. I pulled back, searching his face. What do you mean? But before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something in his expression shifted, hardened into something cold and dangerous. What is it? He turned the phone so I could see. It was a photograph. Me at 12 years old, standing at my mother's funeral in a black dress too big for my skinny frame. I remembered that day with painful clarity. The gray sky, the cheap flowers, the handful of mourners who showed up out of obligation rather than grief. But there was something in the photograph I'd never seen before. A man standing at the edge of the cemetery, watching me. Do you recognize him? Dante asked. I stared at the face in the picture, something cold unfurling in my stomach. No. Are you sure? I've never seen him before. How is this possible? Who would have a picture from my mother's funeral? Dante's jaw tightened. Someone, he said quietly, who's been watching you for a very long time. I demanded answers the next morning. Sleep had been impossible after seeing that photograph. My 12-year-old self frozen in grief, watched by a stranger I'd never noticed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the cemetery shadows. Every time I started to drift off, questions dragged me back to the surface. Who was he? How long had he been watching? And most terrifying of all, why? Dante was in his study when I found him, a cup of coffee growing cold beside untouched documents. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The realization softened something in my chest that I didn't want softened. I need to know everything, I said from the doorway. No more half-truths, no more protection through ignorance. If someone has been watching me since I was a child, I deserve to understand why. He studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind those dark eyes. Sit down. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Something in between, an invitation wrapped in authority. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and waited. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Fine. I mean it, Clara. This information could get you killed faster than anything else I've exposed you to. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I was yours to protect. The words came out sharper than I intended. But instead of anger, I saw something else flicker across his face. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Fair enough. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. My father built the Moretti family from nothing. He started as a runner for the Castellano organization, worked his way up, eventually broke away to form his own operation. By the time I was born, he controlled most of the legitimate business fronts in Chicago. Construction, shipping, restaurants. The illegal side was smaller but profitable. Gambling, mostly. Some protection. I listened without interrupting, sensing that this story had been locked inside him for a long time. My mother hated it. She came from money. Old money. Clean money. And she never understood why my father chose the life he did. But she loved him. Enough to stay. Enough to raise me in a world she despised. What happened to her? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was murdered when I was 14. A car bomb meant for my father. She was driving his car that day because hers was in the shop. The words landed like stones in still water. I thought of my own mother, her slow destruction, her chosen oblivion, and felt something shift between us. Different tragedies, same result. Children left behind to make sense of senseless loss. "I'm sorry," I whispered. My father never recovered. He became paranoid, violent, obsessed with finding who was responsible. It took him 3 years, but eventually he traced the bomb back to his former mentor, a man named Victor Castellano. The name meant nothing to me. But the way Dante said it, with a hatred so cold it burned, told me everything I needed to know. Victor had been like family. My father's teacher, his protector, his closest friend. When my father left to start his own operation, Victor took it as a betrayal. The bomb was his revenge. Did your father... I couldn't finish the question. Kill him? He tried. They met at a warehouse on the south side. My father went alone, against everyone's advice. Victor was waiting with 20 men. My father killed 8 of them before they brought him down. He died believing he'd failed. But Victor survived. Victor disappeared. For 15 years, no one knew if he was alive or dead. The Castellano organization fractured. Other families moved into the power vacuum. I took over what was left of my father's business and rebuilt it into something stronger. He paused, his eyes finding mine across the desk. 6 months ago, I received confirmation that Victor is alive, and that he's been planning something for a very long time. The photograph, my mother's funeral, the stranger in the shadows. You think Victor sent that picture? I don't think... I know. The surveillance, the threats, the way they targeted you specifically, it all bears his signature. Victor doesn't just destroy his enemies. He studies them first, learns their weaknesses, finds the people they care about. But you didn't even know me 6 months ago. No, but Victor did. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications I couldn't fully grasp. That's impossible. I'm nobody. A librarian from the South Side. Why would a crime boss be watching me before I even met you? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He stood abruptly, moving to the window with the restless energy of a caged predator. The morning light caught the angles of his face, softening them in ways that made my breath catch. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I haven't told you. What? The night we met, at the casino, he turned to face me, his expression unreadable. I was expecting you. The room tilted sideways. What? 3 days before, I received a message. Anonymous. Untraceable. It said, "The woman with the green eyes will change everything. Don't let her leave." That's insane. How could anyone know I would be there? I didn't even know until Mia's date canceled. I don't have answers. Only the message, and the certainty that Victor sent it. He wanted us to meet Clara. Whatever game he's playing, you're at the center of it. I should have felt afraid, manipulated, violated by forces I couldn't see or understand. And part of me did feel all of those things, but underneath the fear, something else was rising. A strange, fierce determination that surprised me. Then we changed the game. Dante's eyebrows lifted slightly. You said Victor studies his enemies, finds their weaknesses, uses people against them. I stood, my hands trembling but my voice steady. What if I'm not a weakness? What if I'm something else entirely? You don't know what you're suggesting. I know exactly what I'm suggesting. You need information. You need to understand what Victor wants and why he's been watching me. And I'm the only one who can get close enough to find out. Absolutely not. It's not your decision. The hell it isn't. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping inches from me. This close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the storm brewing behind his eyes. Do you have any idea what Victor Castellano is capable of? The things he's done? The people he's destroyed? No, but I know what it feels like to be powerless, to have your life controlled by forces you can't fight. I lived that way for 18 years, watching my mother disappear into a bottle while I pretended everything was fine. I stepped closer, refusing to back down. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being a pawn. If Victor has been watching me my whole life, then I deserve to know why, and I'm going to find out with or without your help. The silence stretched between us, electric and dangerous. His eyes searched my face, looking for cracks, for weakness, for the fear I refused to show. You're infuriating, he said finally. So I've been told. And reckless, also accurate. And if I say no, then I walk out that door and handle this myself. Something shifted in his expression. The anger melted into something else, something that looked almost like admiration. 3 rules, he said quietly. If we do this together, you follow 3 rules. I'm listening. First, you don't leave without telling me. Not like last night. Not ever again. Fine. Second, you don't lie to me, even if the truth is ugly. Even if you think it will hurt me. I can't protect you from what I don't know. Agreed. Third, he hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it away. Don't fall in love with me. The words landed like a physical blow. I stared at him, suddenly aware of how close we were standing, how I could feel the heat radiating from his body, how my heart was pounding against my ribs. That's presumptuous. It's practical. Feelings complicate things. They make people do stupid, dangerous things. And in my world, stupid and dangerous gets people killed. I should have agreed immediately. Should have laughed it off. Made a joke about his ego. Put distance between us before things got even more complicated. Instead, I heard myself say, I have a rule too, which is, don't treat me like property. His eyes widened slightly. I don't. You do. You bought my rent, you lied to my friend. You've had me followed, watched, protected, all without asking what I wanted. I understand that you're trying to keep me safe, but I'm not a possession, Dante. I'm not something to be acquired and controlled. The silence stretched between us. You're right, he said finally. I apologize. I blinked. Of all the responses I'd expected, an apology wasn't on the list. Good. Then we have an understanding. We have an understanding. He extended his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the strength of his fingers closing around my hand. The touch lasted a beat too long. When I pulled away, my skin was tingling. That night, a storm rolled in from the lake. I'd always hated storms. Ever since I was little, the thunder and lightning sent me into a spiral of panic, heart racing, palms sweating, the desperate need to hide somewhere small and dark. My mother used to laugh at me for it. You're too old for this, Clara. Stop being such a baby. The power went out at midnight. I was in my room when it happened, reading by lamplight. One moment the soft glow surrounded me, the next, absolute darkness. The thunder cracked like the sky was splitting open, and before I could stop myself, I was in the hallway, hyperventilating, my back pressed against the wall. Clara? His voice came from somewhere in the darkness. Footsteps approached. Careful and measured. I'm here, I managed. I'm fine. Just give me a minute. You're not fine. I can hear you breathing from here. Another crack of thunder. I flinched, hating myself for the weakness. Then I felt him beside me. Not touching, just there. A presence in the darkness, solid and warm. When I was young, he said quietly, my mother used to tell me stories during storms. She said the thunder was just the clouds arguing, and the lightning was them making up. That's strangely poetic. She was a strangely poetic woman. He slid down the wall until he was sitting beside me, our shoulders almost touching. She taught me the constellations, too. Said that as long as I could find the North Star, I'd never be truly lost. Can you still find it? Every time. We sat in the darkness while the storm raged outside. He didn't try to fix my fear or tell me I was being irrational. He just stayed. And slowly, Impossibly, my breathing steadied. My heart stopped racing. The panic receded like a tide going out. "Why are you being nice to me?" I asked. "Is that so unusual? For you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "Because you didn't look away?" he said finally. "That first night, when you saw what I was. Most people run. Most people can't handle the truth of this world. But you just kept looking. Maybe I'm too stubborn to run. Maybe. Or maybe you see something others miss." I turned my head, trying to make out his features in the darkness. What would I see? I don't know. No one's ever looked long enough to find out. The storm was fading now, the thunder growing distant, but neither of us moved. We stayed there in the hallway, suspended in the darkness, two people who had no business trusting each other. By the time the lights flickered back on, I had fallen asleep. When I woke, there was a blanket draped over my shoulders, and on my phone, a message from an unknown number. "He's coming home." Attached was an image. A man's face, familiar from the photograph at my mother's funeral. Victor Castellano, and beneath it, 3 words that turned my blood to ice. "Hello again, Clara." I stared at the message until the words blurred, until my eyes burned, until the phone slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. "Again," he said again. Which meant we'd met before. Which meant the stranger at my mother's funeral wasn't a stranger at all. Which meant everything I thought I knew about my life, my ordinary, invisible, unremarkable life, was a lie. The memories came flooding back before I could stop them. I was 12 years old, standing at the edge of my mother's grave in a dress borrowed from a neighbor. The funeral had been small, a handful of people who showed up out of obligation, a minister who mispronounced her name, a casket so cheap I could see the seams. I remember thinking that she deserved better. I remember hating myself for thinking it, because hadn't I spent years wishing she would just disappear? And then there was the man. He'd approached me after the service, while the other mourners dispersed like smoke. I'd assumed he was a distant relative, one of those strangers who materialize at funerals with vague condolences and vaguer connections. He was older, distinguished, with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed to see straight through me. "You're going to be extraordinary," he'd said. I'd forgotten those words, buried them along with everything else from that terrible day. But now they surfaced with violent clarity, dragging other memories with them. The anonymous scholarship that paid for my college textbooks. The apartment I'd found when every other landlord turned me away. The one with the suspiciously low rent and the landlord who never asked questions. The job at the library that had fallen into my lap after a single interview, despite my complete lack of experience. Breadcrumbs. A trail I'd never noticed because I'd been too busy surviving to look up. "Clara." Dante's voice cut through the spiral. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway, already dressed, his expression sharp with concern. "I need to show you something," I said. The words came out hollow. "On my phone." He crossed the room and retrieved it from the floor. I watched his face as he read the message. Watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. Watched the storm gather behind his eyes. When did this come? Last night. During the storm? I didn't see it until this morning. Victor. He knows me, Dante. He's known me for years, maybe my whole life. I told him about the funeral, about the man with the silver temples and the strange prophecy, about all the little coincidences that suddenly looked like something else entirely. "Someone's been clearing my path," I said, "removing obstacles, making sure I survived, that I got educated, that I ended up exactly where I am right now, and I never saw it. I never questioned any of it. You couldn't have known. But I should have. I should have wondered why things kept falling into place for a girl with nothing. Orphans don't get lucky, Dante. Not like that. Not unless someone's pulling strings." He was quiet for a long moment, processing. "There's more," he said finally. "I received intelligence this morning about Victor's movements. And he's been back in the country for 6 months, operating out of Miami, rebuilding what's left of the Castellano network. But his focus hasn't been on territory or business. It's been on something else." "On what?" "On you." The word landed like a blade between my ribs. "My people found records. Dante continued. Financial transfers, surveillance reports, correspondence going back almost 2 decades. Victor has been watching you since you were a child, funding your education, arranging your employment, keeping you safe from threats you never knew existed. Why? My voice cracked. Why would a crime boss care about some random girl from the South Side? That's what I'm trying to understand. He moved closer, his eyes searching my face. Clara, I need you to think carefully. Did your mother ever mention a man named Victor? Or Castellano? Any connection to that world at all? I shook my head, but even as I did, something was surfacing. A memory, fragmented and faded, from the year before my mother died. She'd been sober that day, one of her rare clear moments. We were cleaning out the attic, sorting through boxes of junk she'd accumulated over the years. I found a photograph tucked inside a book, and when I showed it to her, she went pale. Where did you find that? It was in this book. Who is he? She'd snatched it from my hands, her eyes wild with something I didn't recognize. No one. He's no one. Don't ever ask about him again. I'd forgotten that moment, buried it like everything else. But now it returned with sickening clarity. There was a photograph, I told Dante. When I was 11. A picture of a man I didn't recognize. My mother. She was terrified when she saw it. She made me promise never to ask about him again. Do you remember what he looked like? I closed my eyes, reaching back through the years. Dark hair, handsome in a cold kind of way, and his eyes. They were strange. Light, almost gray, like winter. Dante's expression hardened. That's Victor. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. My mother knew him. It appears so. But how? She was a waitress. She never left Chicago. She didn't have connections to anyone powerful. She was nobody. Clara. His voice was gentle but firm. Your mother kept secrets. Whatever her connection to Victor was, she took it to her grave. I thought of her then. Not the drunk, not the failure, not the woman who chose oblivion over her own daughter. I thought of the woman she'd been before, the one in the photographs from my childhood, smiling and bright and full of hope, the one who used to sing me to sleep, who taught me to read, who promised me that someday everything would be better. What had happened to her? What had broken her so completely? I need to find out, I said. I need to know the truth about my mother. It might be dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. But I can't keep running from shadows. If Victor has been orchestrating my life for 20 years, I deserve to understand why. Dante studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. There's someone who might have answers. A woman named Rose DeMarco. She was Victor's mistress for almost a decade before she disappeared. My sources say she's living in Detroit now, under a different name. You think she knows about my mother? I think she knows about everyone Victor ever cared about. And from what we've uncovered, your mother might have been one of them. The implication hung in the air, too heavy to touch. You think they were involved? I think it's possible. Victor was married young, but he was known for his affairs. If your mother was one of them, it would explain his interest in you. His interest in me. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You make it sound so clinical, like I'm a project, an investment. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. His eyes met mine, dark and serious. Victor doesn't do anything without reason, Clara. If he's been shaping your life since childhood, it's because he wants something from you. Something he's been waiting a very long time to collect. The cold spread through me like poison. Then I need to find out what it is before he comes to collect. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. The memories I'd locked away came flooding back. Not the bad ones, not the drinking and the neglect and the slow collapse, but the ones from before. The ones I'd trained myself to forget because remembering hurt too much. She used to braid my hair every morning before school, her fingers gentle as she wove the strands together. She used to make up stories about princesses and dragons, about girls who saved themselves instead of waiting for rescue. She used to hold me during thunderstorms and tell me that I was braver than I knew. What had happened to that woman? I pulled out the box of her things I'd kept. The only box. the only remnants of a life that had ended long before her heart stopped beating. Old photographs, a few pieces of costume jewelry, a diary I'd never had the courage to read. Now I opened it. The entries were sporadic, spanning years. Mundane observations about weather and work and the tedious details of daily life. But buried among the ordinary, I found fragments of something else. He came again today. I told him I can't see him anymore. But when he looks at me, I forget all the reasons why not. The baby is growing. Sometimes I wonder what she'll look like, if she'll have his eyes. He says he'll leave her. He says we can start over, somewhere far away, where no one knows our names. I want to believe him. I was a fool. I was such a fool. And now Clara will pay the price for my weakness. I sat in the darkness, my mother's diary clutched against my chest, and finally understood. Victor Castellano wasn't watching me because I'd stumbled into his world by accident. He was watching me because I was his, my mother's great secret, my father's true identity, the man at the funeral, the stranger in the shadows, the ghost who had haunted my entire life. I was Victor Castellano's daughter, and I had just fallen into the orbit of his greatest enemy. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered with shaking hands. I see you found the diary. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Smooth, cultured, patient. The voice of a man who had waited 23 years for this moment. You're my father. I prefer to think of myself as your architect. Everything you are, Clara, everything you've become, I built that. I shaped you into exactly what I needed. What do you need? A way back into the Moretti world? A weapon that Dante trusts completely. He laughed softly. You've exceeded every expectation. The way he looks at you. He has no idea what's coming. I won't help you destroy him. Oh, my darling girl, you already have. The line went dead. I sat motionless in the darkness, the diary still pressed against my heart, and felt everything I thought I knew crumble into dust. I was the trap. I'd been the trap all along. And Dante Moretti had no idea that the woman he was starting to care about had been designed, from the very beginning, to be his destruction. I didn't sleep that night. The diary lay open beside me, my mother's handwriting swimming before my eyes every time I tried to read it again. The words hadn't changed. They never would. But I kept hoping I'd misunderstood. That there was some other explanation, some innocent interpretation that didn't shatter everything I'd believed about myself. There wasn't. Victor Castellano was my father. My mother had loved him, been ruined by him, drunk herself into an early grave because of him. And I, the daughter she'd tried so hard to protect, had walked directly into his trap. By morning, I still hadn't decided what to do. Tell Dante the truth. That was the right choice, the honest choice. He deserved to know that the woman he'd brought into his home, the woman he'd started to trust, was the biological daughter of his greatest enemy. But every time I tried to form the words, Victor's voice echoed in my head. The way he looks at you. He has no idea what's coming. If I told Dante, would he believe that I hadn't known? Would he trust that I wasn't part of Victor's plan? That I was as much a victim as he was? Or would he see me as the threat I'd always been designed to be? I couldn't lose him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere in the chaos of the past week, Dante Moretti had become more than my protector. He'd become the first person in my life who saw me, really saw me, and hadn't looked away. I couldn't lose that, not when I'd only just found it, so I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I said nothing. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tension and pretense. I smiled when Dante looked at me. I laughed at dinner. I played the role of the woman I'd been before the phone call, before the diary, before the truth had cracked me open like an egg. He noticed something was wrong. Of course he did. Dante noticed everything. But when he asked, I blamed it on stress, on the photograph, on the weight of being watched by a man I didn't know. Half-truths wrapped in deflection. It was the first time I'd lied to him. It wouldn't be the last. On the 4th day, everything changed. I was in the library, one of the penthouse's many rooms I discovered during my exploration, when I heard the commotion, raised voices, running footsteps, the sharp crack of a door slamming against a wall. I moved to the hallway just in time to see Dante striding toward the elevator, flanked by 4 of his men. His face was a mask of cold fury. "What's happening?" He barely glanced at me. "Stay here." "Dante, what's—" I said, "Stay here." The elevator doors closed before I could argue. I stood in the empty hallway, my heart pounding, and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Something had happened. Something terrible. It was 3 hours before he returned. When he did, there was blood on his hands. Not a lot, just a smear across his knuckles, a splash on the cuff of his white shirt, but enough to tell me that wherever he'd been, violence had followed. He moved past me without speaking, heading straight for the bathroom. I heard water running, then silence. I found him standing at the sink, his hands braced against the marble, his head bowed. What happened? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Victor made a move. What kind of move? He killed 3 of my men, ambushed them at a warehouse on the south side, left their bodies arranged like a message. I felt the blood drain from my face. A message. For me. To show me he can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. That nowhere is safe. He turned to face me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not fear. Dante Moretti didn't fear anything, but something close. Something that looked like grief. One of them was Marco's son, 22 years old. He'd been with us for 6 months. Dante, I recruited him myself, promised his father I'd keep him safe. And now I have to tell a man who served my family for 30 years that his only son is dead because of me. The weight of his words pressed down on both of us. I wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but I didn't know if I had the right. Not when Victor's blood ran through my veins. Not when the man responsible for this carnage was my father. "This isn't your fault," I said. The words tasted like ash. Everything that happens in my world is my fault. That's what it means to lead. He moved past me into the bedroom, stripping off his stained shirt with sharp, angry movements. I watched from the doorway as he threw it in the trash, as he pulled on a fresh one, as he rebuilt himself piece by piece into the man the world expected him to be. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "What I have to do. Victor wants a war. He'll get one. But this time, it ends with him in the ground." The coldness in his voice frightened me more than anything I'd heard before. This wasn't the man who'd held me during a thunderstorm, who'd told me stories about his mother's constellations. This was the Mafia boss, the killer, the monster everyone warned me about, and yet, even now, I couldn't look away. The retaliation came 2 nights later. I wasn't supposed to see it. Dante had gone to great lengths to shield me from the violent reality of his world, conducting business behind closed doors, speaking in coded language when I was near. But that night, sleep eluded me, and I wandered the penthouse in search of something. Water, air, escape from my own thoughts. That's when I heard the screams. They came from somewhere below, muffled but unmistakable. Human sounds of pain and terror that turned my blood to ice. I followed them to a door I'd never noticed before, tucked into a corner of the hallway, and discovered it led to a service elevator. I should have walked away. I should have returned to my room and pretended I'd heard nothing. But something in me, that reckless, stubborn part that had walked toward Dante instead of away, needed to know. The elevator deposited me in a basement I didn't know existed. Concrete walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of copper and fear hanging thick in the air. I moved through the shadows, following the sounds, until I reached a door that stood slightly ajar. Inside, I saw Dante. He stood before a man bound to a chair, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his expression utterly blank. 2 of his men flanked him, and on a table nearby lay an array of implements I couldn't look at directly. The bound man was sobbing, pleading, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate cascade. "I didn't know. I swear to God. I didn't know what Victor was planning. Please, you have to believe me." "I believe you," Dante said calmly. "That's not why you're here. Then why are you doing this?" "Because Victor needs to understand what his actions cost. He took 3 of my men. I'm going to take everything from him, starting with everyone who ever carried his name." The screaming started again. I stumbled backward, my hand pressed against my mouth to contain the sound clawing at my throat. This was what protection meant. This was the truth beneath the velvet and the marble and the gentle hands that had held me through a storm. Dante Moretti wasn't just a dangerous man, he was death itself, wrapped in beautiful packaging. I made it back to my room before I collapsed. My legs gave out the moment the door closed behind me, and I sank to the floor, shaking so violently I could hear my teeth chattering. The sounds from the basement echoed in my mind, the screams, the wet noises I refused to identify, the terrible calm of Dante's voice. This was the man I'd been falling for, the man I'd defended, trusted, allowed into the wounded places of my heart. This was my father's enemy. And my father was the architect of all of it. The deaths, the violence, the cycle of blood that never seemed to end. Victor had killed Dante's mother. Dante had spent his entire life preparing to return the favor. And I was caught in the middle, the unwitting pawn in a game that had started before I was born. I thought of the 3 men who'd died at the warehouse, the 22-year-old with his whole life ahead of him, the father who would never recover from his grief. I thought of my mother, drinking herself to death because she couldn't escape the choices she'd made. I thought of Dante, standing in that basement with blood on his hands and ice in his eyes. And I finally understood what Victor had meant. You've exceeded every expectation. He'd known this would happen. Known that I would see the violence, that it would horrify me, that it would create a wedge between me and the man I was supposed to destroy. Victor was playing chess while everyone else played checkers, and I was just another piece on his board. But he'd miscalculated. Because seeing Dante's darkness didn't make me hate him. It made me grieve for him, for the boy who'd lost his mother, for the man who'd been forged in blood and vengeance, for the heart that still beat somewhere beneath all that armor. I couldn't save him. I wasn't naive enough to believe that love could undo decades of damage. But I could refuse to be Victor's weapon. I could choose my own path, even if it led somewhere I couldn't see. The next morning, the news broke. Federal agents had raided one of Dante's properties. 3 men were arrested. Evidence was seized, documents, photographs, financial records that could bring down the entire Moretti operation. Evidence that Victor had planted. The headlines screamed Dante's name. The talking heads speculated about his involvement in unsolved murders, his ties to organized crime, his history of violence, and buried in the coverage, a single detail that made my heart stop. The evidence included a photograph. Me, standing at the window of the penthouse, circled in red marker. The reporter's voice droned on, speculating about my identity, my connection to the Moretti family, whether I was a victim or a willing participant. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because I finally understood. Victor had orchestrated everything. The meeting at the casino, the threats, the surveillance. He'd wanted me to end up here, in Dante's world, in Dante's home. And now he'd exposed us both, ensuring that whatever happened next would be splashed across every news outlet in the country. I was the key to Dante's destruction, and I was the only one who could save him. You're the only one who can clear his name, the television seemed to whisper, or bury him forever. I picked up my phone and stared at the unknown number still saved in my contacts. Victor answered on the first ring. I knew you'd call. Meet me, tonight. Alone. And why would I do that? Because I have something you want. Something you've been waiting 23 years to claim. Silence on the other end. Then, a soft laugh. My darling girl. I've been waiting for you to say that. He gave me an address. I memorized it. And as I hung up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there. It would always be there. But beneath it, something stronger was emerging. I was done being a pawn. It was time to become a player. I left at midnight. The penthouse was quiet. The guards stationed at their usual posts, their eyes trained on the elevator and the main entrance. They weren't watching the service corridor. They weren't expecting the woman they'd been assigned to protect to slip through the shadows like a ghost. I'd learned a few things in my week as Dante Moretti's prisoner, where the cameras had blind spots, which guards changed shifts at which hours, how to move through a building designed for security without triggering a single alarm. Dante had underestimated me. They all had. I left a note on his pillow, 3 sentences that took me an hour to write. Some doors I have to open alone. Don't come after me. Trust me one more time. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to explain what I was about to do, or why. But I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. If he knew I was meeting Victor, he'd tear the city apart to stop me. And if he knew Victor was my father, I couldn't think about that. Not now. Not when I needed every ounce of focus to survive what came next. The address Victor had given me led to an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. St. Margaret's, according to the faded sign hanging crooked above the door. It had been beautiful once. Soaring Gothic architecture, stained glass windows, a bell tower that reached toward heaven. Now it was a skeleton, gutted by time and neglect, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. A fitting place to meet a monster. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped into darkness. The nave stretched before me, empty pews coated in dust, moonlight streaming through the broken windows to cast fractured patterns on the floor. At the far end, where the altar once stood, a single figure waited. Victor Castellano looked exactly as I remembered. Silver at his temples, cold gray eyes, a face that might have been handsome once, before whatever lived behind it had twisted it into something else. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, and stood with his hands clasped behind his back like a man surveying his kingdom. Clara. His voice echoed through the empty space, warm and welcoming, as if we were meeting for Sunday brunch. My beautiful girl. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. I stopped halfway down the aisle, maintaining distance between us. I'm not your girl. Biology would disagree. Biology doesn't make a father. Presence does. Care does. You're just a stranger who happened to contribute some DNA. Something flickered across his face. Irritation, quickly masked. He wasn't used to being challenged. Wasn't used to people refusing to play along with whatever script he'd written in his head. I understand your anger, he said smoothly. I do. You grew up without me, without knowing who you truly were. That must have been difficult. Difficult. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My mother drank herself to death because of you. I spent my childhood raising myself, wondering why I was never enough to make her want to stay sober. And you were out there the whole time, watching, manipulating, treating my life like a chess game. I was protecting you. From what? From this. He gestured broadly, encompassing the church, the city beyond, the world he inhabited, from the violence and the blood and the endless cycle of revenge. I wanted you to have a normal life, Clara, a chance to become something better than what I am. So you funded my education, arranged my apartment, made sure I ended up at that library. Yes. And then you engineered a meeting with Dante Moretti and sent me into the heart of everything you supposedly wanted to protect me from. His smile faltered. That was necessary. Necessary for what? He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those cold gray eyes. I could see him recalculating, adjusting whatever strategy he'd planned based on my refusal to cooperate. Dante Moretti destroyed my life, he said finally. Took everything from me. My organization, my reputation, my future. I spent 15 years in exile, rebuilding from nothing, waiting for the moment I could return. Dante didn't destroy your life. You destroyed his... You killed his mother. His mother was an accident. Collateral damage in a war his father started. An accident. I stared at him, disgust rising in my throat. You planted a car bomb. You just didn't care who was driving. I cared. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. I cared more than you can possibly understand. But this world, this life, it demands sacrifices. It demands that we become things we never wanted to be. And what did you want to be? A father, he said simply. A real one, to you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I searched his face for deception, for manipulation, for the calculated cruelty I knew lived inside him. But all I saw was something that looked terrifyingly like sincerity. Then why now? I asked. Why wait 23 years and then throw me into the middle of your war? Because I needed you to understand him first, to see who he really is. The violence, the control, the way he treats people like possessions. I needed you to see the monster before I asked you to help me destroy him. You think I'll help you? I think you're smarter than you let anyone see. I think you've spent your whole life surviving, adapting, finding ways to thrive in impossible situations. And I think... He stepped closer again, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and old-fashioned. I think you know that Dante Moretti will never let you go. As long as he lives, you'll be his prisoner. His property, a bird in a gilded cage. And if I help you, what then? Freedom, a new identity, enough money to go anywhere, be anyone. I'll disappear from your life forever if that's what you want. You'll never have to see me again. It was everything I should have wanted. An escape from the violence, from the danger, from the impossible situation I'd found myself in. All I had to do was betray the man I was falling in love with. What do you need from me? Victor's eyes gleamed with triumph. Information. The location of his safe houses, his financial records, the names of his allies. With your access, you could gather everything I need to bring him down legally. The FBI is already circling. I made sure of that. One more push, and Dante Moretti spends the rest of his life in federal prison. Not dead? I considered it. But death is too quick, too merciful. I want him to suffer the way I suffered. Alone. Forgotten. Watching everything he built crumble to dust. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a thumb drive, sleek and silver. This contains software that will copy everything on his computers. All you have to do is plug it in and let it run for 60 seconds, then walk away. I stared at the drive in his hand. And if I refuse? Then I'll have to take a more direct approach, one that will be significantly messier for everyone involved. His voice hardened. Including your friend Mia. My blood turned to ice. You wouldn't. I would do anything to achieve my goals, Clara. Surely you understand that by now. He pressed the drive into my palm, his fingers cold against my skin. You have 48 hours. After that, I'll assume you've made your choice. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing through the empty church. I watched him go. My hand clenched around the drive so tightly my knuckles ached. Victor. He paused at the door. I have a question. Ask, did you love her? My mother? Did you actually love her? Or was she just another pawn in your game? For a long moment, he didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of its polished charm. I loved her more than I've ever loved anything in my life. And losing her broke something in me that will never heal. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness, leaving me alone in the ruins of a church with a choice I didn't know how to make. I stood there for what felt like hours. The weight of the thumb drive in my hand felt like a grenade, like a promise, like a betrayal waiting to happen. Victor's words echoed in my mind, mixing with memories of Dante, his gentleness during the storm, his rage in the basement, the way he looked at me like I was something precious. Two men, two monsters, both claiming to want to protect me, both willing to destroy anything in their path, and me, caught in the middle, forced to choose between them. But as I stood in the darkness, something else began to surface. Not fear, not confusion. Something stronger, fiercer, something that had been building inside me since the moment I'd walked toward Dante Moretti's table instead of away. I was done being pulled between forces I couldn't control. I was done being a victim, a pawn, a prize to be won. Victor thought he knew me. He'd watched me for 23 years, studied my patterns, predicted my responses. He was counting on the scared little girl who'd learned to survive by staying invisible, by going along with whatever powerful people demanded. But that girl was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who'd stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Someone who'd fallen in love with a monster and discovered that monsters could be tender, that darkness could shelter as well as threaten, that the world was far more complicated than the simple stories she'd been told. I pulled out my phone and hit record. My name is Clara Ashford. The time is 2:47 a.m., and I'm standing in St. Margaret's Church on the outskirts of Chicago. I've just had a conversation with Victor Castellano, who has confessed to multiple crimes including the murder of Elena Moretti and the orchestration of attacks against the Moretti organization. He has also attempted to coerce me into committing espionage against Dante Moretti by threatening harm to my friend Mia Chen. I spoke clearly, calmly, laying out everything Victor had said, every threat, every admission, every detail that could be used against him. When I finished, I saved the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked at the thumb drive still clutched in my other hand. Victor had given me a weapon against Dante. But weapons could be turned against their makers. All I needed was the courage to pull the trigger. I was halfway to the door when they found me. 3 men, emerging from the shadows like smoke. Victor's men. I recognized the cold efficiency in their movements, the predatory calm in their eyes. They'd been waiting here the whole time, watching, making sure I didn't do exactly what I'd just done. Miss Ashford? The leader's voice was polite, almost apologetic. I'm afraid Mr. Castellano would like you to remain here for a while longer. I thought I had 48 hours. Plans change. They moved toward me and I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The exit was too far. The windows were too high. I had no weapon, no training, nothing but desperation and a recording that could destroy everything Victor had built. He's my father, I said, hating the tremor in my voice. He won't hurt me. Mr. Castellanos' instructions were very specific. The man pulled out a phone, his expression blank. You're not to leave this building under any circumstances, and you're to hand over any recording devices immediately. They knew. Of course they knew. Victor hadn't survived this long by being careless. I backed up another step, and my heel caught on a loose stone. I stumbled, caught myself on a broken pew, and felt splinters dig into my palm. Please, I whispered. Please, just let me go. I'm sorry, Miss Ashford. Truly. He reached for me. And then the world exploded. The church doors burst open with a crash that shook dust from the rafters. Gunfire erupted, sharp, precise, deadly. Victor's men scattered, returning fire, their shouts swallowed by the chaos. Through the smoke and the noise, I saw him, Dante. He moved like violence given form, cutting through Victor's men with a cold efficiency that made my breath catch. 2 of his guards flanked him, but he didn't need them. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, terrifying, beautiful in his fury. In seconds, it was over. Victor's men lay motionless on the church floor. Dante stood in the center of the nave, his chest heaving, his eyes finding mine through the settling dust. I told you not to come after me, I whispered. You should know by now. His voice was rough, ragged, barely controlled. I don't follow orders. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and pulled me against him, his arms wrapped around me, crushing me against his chest, and I felt his heart pounding against my cheek. Wild, desperate, alive. I thought I'd lost you, he murmured into my hair. When I woke up and found that note, I thought, I know. I'm sorry. Why, Clara? Why would you come here alone? I pulled back far enough to see his face. The mask was gone. In its place was something raw, something vulnerable, something that looked terrifyingly like love. Because I had to, I said. Because Victor is my father. The words fell between us like stones into still water. I watched the shock ripple across his features, the disbelief, the confusion, the dawning horror. Your father, he had an affair with my mother. Before you ask, I didn't know. Not until a few days ago. And I should have told you. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was part of his plan. Afraid you'd... Clara? I recorded everything. My voice cracked. Everything he said. Every threat. Every confession. I was going to bring it to you. I was going to... Clara? He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. I don't care who your father is. You should. He's the reason your mother is dead. He's the reason. And you, Dante interrupted gently, are the reason I finally have a way to stop him. He brushed his thumb across my cheek, catching a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. You came here alone to gather evidence against your own father, to protect me, to protect both of us. Why? The question hung in the air, heavy with everything unsaid. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of a church with blood on the floor and chaos echoing around us, I finally admitted the truth I'd been hiding even from myself. Because I love you. The words came out broken, terrified, barely louder than a whisper. I waited for him to pull away, to realize that loving Victor Castellanos' daughter was impossible, to remember all the reasons this could never work. Instead, he kissed me. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't soft. It was desperate and fierce and full of everything we'd both been afraid to feel. His hands tangled in my hair, his mouth claiming mine, and I kissed him back with everything I had. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasping, his forehead rested against mine. "I told you not to fall in love with me," he murmured. "I never was very good at following rules." A sound outside. Sirens approaching, the world rushing back in. Dante pulled away, his expression hardening into command. "We need to go. Victor will know his men failed. He'll retaliate. I have the recording. Everything he confessed. Then we end this, tonight." He took my hand, his grip warm and certain, and led me toward the door. Behind us, the church settled back into silence, a mausoleum to the violence that had passed through its walls. Ahead of us, the final battle waited. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The war ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Victor Castellano had built his empire on patience, on careful planning, on the assumption that he was always 3 steps ahead. But he'd made one fatal miscalculation. He'd underestimated the daughter he'd spent 23 years shaping. He thought he'd created a weapon. Instead, he'd forged something far more dangerous, a woman who refused to be used. The recording I'd made in St. Margaret's Church went to the FBI within hours of our escape. Dante's lawyers, a small army of them, apparently, ensured that every word was authenticated, every confession verified, every threat documented. Victor had been so certain of his control over me that he'd spoken freely, arrogantly, never imagining that the scared little girl he'd been watching would turn his own words into a noose. The arrests began at dawn. I watched from the penthouse windows as news helicopters circled the city, their cameras trained on federal agents swarming Victor's properties. His network crumbled like a house of cards, decades of careful construction undone in a matter of hours. Associates flipped, eager to trade information for leniency. Bank accounts were frozen. Safe houses were raided. By noon, Victor Castellano was in federal custody. He'd tried to run, of course, tried to disappear the way he had 15 years ago, slipping through the cracks in the system he'd learned to manipulate. But this time, there were no cracks. This time, every avenue of escape had been sealed, by Dante's people, by the FBI, by a coalition of enemies who'd waited years for this moment. They found him at a private airstrip on the outskirts of the city, boarding a plane that would never take off. The footage played on every news channel. Victor in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his cold gray eyes blazing with impotent fury. I made myself watch. I needed to see him diminished. Needed to witness the moment when the ghost who'd haunted my entire life became just a man, flawed, mortal, defeated. I needed to know that the shadow he'd cast over me was finally, irrevocably, gone. When the cameras caught his face, something twisted in my chest. Not sympathy. I was far past that. But something like grief. Not for the man he was, but for the father he might have been. For the life we might have had if he'd made different choices, loved differently, been someone other than who he was. I mourned the possibility. Then I let it go. Dante found me still standing at the window, my forehead pressed against the cool glass. "It's over," he said quietly. "I know. How do you feel?" I turned to face him. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tension carved into the lines of his face. He'd been awake for nearly 48 hours, coordinating with lawyers and agents, managing the chaos that Victor's arrest had unleashed. But underneath the exhaustion, I saw something else. Peace. For the first time since I'd met him, Dante Moretti looked like a man who wasn't waiting for the next attack. "I don't know how I feel," I admitted. "Relieved, I think, and sad, and angry, and free. Free. Is that strange? He was my father. I should feel something more than this." "You feel exactly what you should feel." Dante moved closer, his hand finding mine. "He may have been your father by blood, but he was never your family. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't threaten. Family doesn't treat the people they love like pieces on a chessboard. Then what does family do? They show up." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "They stay, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. They choose you, over and over again, every single day." I thought of my mother, not the drunk, not the failure, but the woman who'd tried so hard to protect me from the truth. She'd made terrible choices. Yes. But she'd also kept Victor's secret for 23 years, had drunk herself into oblivion rather than expose me to his world, had loved me enough to destroy herself. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't right, but it was, in its own broken way, a kind of love. I want to visit her grave, I said. My mother's. I haven't been since the funeral. I'll take you. Whenever you're ready. Today, I need to tell her it's over, that she can rest now. Dante nodded. No questions asked. That was one of the things I'd come to love about him. His understanding that some things didn't require explanation. Some things just needed to be done. We drove to the cemetery in silence. It was a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but never delivered. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful, a small patch of green on the edge of the city where the noise of traffic faded to a whisper. I hadn't been here in 11 years. Hadn't been able to face the memories, the guilt, the tangled mess of emotions that my mother's death had left behind. But I was different now. Stronger. Ready to face the ghosts I'd been running from. Her grave was simpler than I remembered. A small headstone, weathered by time, with just her name and dates carved into the granite. Margaret Rose Ashford, 1971-2012. Beloved mother. I'd chosen those words myself, 16 years old and drowning in grief, wanting so desperately to believe they were true. Now I knew they were. I knelt in the grass, my fingers tracing the letters of her name. Hi, Mom. The words came out rough, scraped raw by years of silence. I know it's been a long time. I'm sorry I was angry at you for so long, for leaving, for giving up, for not being strong enough to stay. But I understand now. I understand what you were carrying, what you were trying to protect me from. Dante stood a few paces back, giving me space. I could feel his presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. Supportive, patient. There. He's gone now. Victor. They arrested him this morning. He's going to prison for a very long time, maybe forever. He can't hurt anyone else. He can't hurt me. I pressed my palm flat against the cold stone. I met someone. Mom. Someone who sees me. Really sees me. The way you used to before everything fell apart. He's not perfect. He's done terrible things. Things I'm still learning to understand. But he's trying. And so am I. A single tear slid down my cheek, warm against my cold skin. I forgive you. For all of it. The drinking, the secrets, the way you left me to figure everything out alone. I know you did the best you could with what you had, and I want you to know. I turned out okay. Better than okay. I survived. I found someone to love. I found myself. I leaned forward and pressed my lips to the top of the headstone. Rest now, Mom. You kept your promise. You kept me safe. The clouds finally broke as I stood, a light rain misting down from the gray sky. Dante was beside me in an instant, his arms sliding around my waist. Are you all right? I think so. For the first time in a long time, I think I really am. We stood there in the rain, two people who had no business finding each other, holding on as if letting go would mean drowning. And maybe it would have. Maybe we were each other's lifelines, thrown across the churning waters of our pasts. Or maybe we were just two broken people who'd finally found someone willing to help them heal. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet. Without Victor's shadow looming over us, life took on a rhythm I'd never experienced before. I moved out of the penthouse, not because Dante asked me to, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. I found a small apartment in a neighborhood that felt like home, with a view of the lake and neighbors who smiled when they passed me in the hall. Dante didn't argue. He understood, the way he always seemed to understand, that my independence was something I'd earned through years of struggle and couldn't surrender without losing a part of myself. But he was there, every day, in ways both large and small. Morning coffee delivered to my door, evening walks along the waterfront, long conversations that stretched into the night, filling the spaces between us with words we'd both been afraid to speak. I learned the truth about his world, not the sanitized version he'd shown me before, but the full, brutal reality. The violence that had shaped him, the choices he'd made to survive, the bodies he'd buried, literally and figuratively, on his climb to power. It should have horrified me. Part of it did. But I'd seen enough darkness in my own life to recognize that monsters weren't born, they were made, one trauma at a time. And Dante Moretti, for all his sins, was trying to be something different. For me, for us, for the future we were slowly, carefully building together. The trial came 6 months later. I testified against Victor in a federal courtroom, my voice steady as I recounted everything he'd told me in St. Margaret's Church, the threats, the confessions, the cold calculation with which he'd orchestrated decades of violence. He watched me from the defendant's table, his gray eyes burning with a rage I refused to let touch me. Once, that look would have frozen me solid. Now, I met it without flinching. You made me, his gaze seemed to say. Everything you are is because of me. No, I thought back. Everything I am is in spite of you. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt finished. Like a book I'd been carrying for too long had finally been closed. Victor was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. As the guards led him away, he turned to look at me one last time. You could have been a queen, he said. You could have had everything. I have everything, I replied. Just not from you. They took him through a door that locked behind him with a sound like finality. I never saw him again. 1 year to the day after we met, Dante took me back to the Velvet Crown Casino. I didn't recognize it at first. He'd renovated it completely, transformed it from a den of smoke and desperation into something brighter, cleaner, almost elegant. The velvet ropes were gone. The private tables had been removed. In their place was an open floor filled with laughter and light. What is this? I asked, turning to face him. A new beginning. He took my hands in his dark eyes warm with something I'd learned to recognize as love. I'm done with the old world, Clara. The violence, the darkness, all of it. I've spent the last year dismantling everything my father built, going legitimate, becoming someone who deserves you. You always deserved me. No. His voice was fierce, certain. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to... He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I know you need more time, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to have this. He opened the box to reveal a ring. Not a diamond, but an emerald. The exact color of my eyes. Simple. Beautiful. Perfect. It belonged to my mother, he said quietly. She told me once that I should give it to someone who made me want to be better. Someone who saw past the monster to the man underneath. Tears blurred my vision as he slid the ring onto my finger. You saved me, Clara. Not from Victor. Not from my enemies, but from myself. You showed me that there's more to life than power and revenge. That there's something worth fighting for beyond survival. Dante, you don't have to say anything. He pressed his lips to my forehead. Just know that whatever happens next, wherever this road takes us, I'm yours. Completely. Forever. I wrapped my arms around him and held on, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, strong and steady and alive. A year ago, I'd been invisible. A ghost drifting through a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I'd believed that safety meant staying small, that survival meant never being seen, that love was something that happened to other people. Braver people, luckier people, people who hadn't been broken the way I had. I'd been wrong about all of it. Love wasn't about luck. It was about choice. The choice to stay when everything screamed at you to run. The choice to trust when trust had only ever brought you pain. The choice to open your heart, knowing full well that it might be shattered, and deciding that the risk was worth it. I'd made that choice over and over again, through fear and doubt and darkness. And standing there in the casino where it all began, with an emerald ring on my finger and a dangerous man's arms around me, I knew I would make it again. Some love stories end with happily ever after. Ours ended with a beginning. The beginning of a life built not on secrets and manipulation, but on truth, on trust, on two people who had every reason to destroy each other, choosing, instead, to heal. I used to dream about being rescued, about some prince showing up to carry me away from the mess of my life. Now I know better. Rescue doesn't come from princes. It comes from within. From the moment you decide that you're worth fighting for, from the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light, even when the light is terrifying, I rescued myself. And along the way, I found someone willing to walk beside me, not behind me, not ahead of me, beside me. That's the love story no one tells you about. The one where two broken people learn to hold each other's pieces together. The one where the monster and the maiden discover they're not so different after all. The one where the girl who spent her whole life being invisible finally, irrevocably, allows herself to be seen. My name is Clara Ashford, and this is how I learned to live. If you made it to the end of this story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and click the yellow bell to subscribe to the channel and support us. Keep the adventure going by clicking on the suggested video on your screen.